Okay. Well, we've had a very intense afternoon or morning or evening, depending on what part of the world you're in. Thank you so much to everyone who has sort of stuck with us from the start. Thanks to everyone who's dropped in to join us now as well. So we're into the sort of final part of the kind of conference paper sessions, and we've sort of loosely structured it as sort of perspectives and reflections from people who've sort of led the field in archaeological pedagogy, and then we've had the open papers session with speakers talking about sort of really a real range of exciting contemporary practice in archaeological pedagogy. And finally, we're looking to the future in this sort of second plenary session, and we're really sort of grateful to the people who are speaking and the sort of ways that they're thinking about the future. I'm not going to waffle on too much, except to say that we're super grateful to Matthew Johnson, who has very kindly agreed to chair this session. So as usual, we're going to keep to time, we're going to plough on, so I'll hand over to Matthew. Did you need to say anything?
Yeah, no, just say thank you to Matthew for chairing. He probably needs very little introduction. I think most of us have got your book on our bookshelves.
and use it for teaching?
All the time, yeah. Okay.
Well,
so we'll hand over to Matthew.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Hannah and Karina, for those kind comments, and thank you both for organising this conference. And also, I will return the compliment. I've just finished reading Assembling Archaeology, and I can recommend it to everybody here who hasn't seen it. It's a real milestone, I think, in archaeological pedagogy, and it should be essential reading for everyone. I will be chairing this afternoon. The title of this afternoon's session is The Future of Teaching and Learning in Archaeology and Heritage. The format will be the same as the previous sessions. We will have a series of 10-minute short statements. We will have a brief stretch break halfway through after the first five presentations, then more presentations, and then questions at the end. So I encourage you to post questions in the chat as we go along, or hold on to them to the end. Hannah and Karina, I think you're going to compile them, and then we will hopefully take those questions at the end. Last, by no means least, let me remind everybody of the code of conduct that has been circulated. This is a very important aspect of what we're doing here. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our first speaker this afternoon. This is Rosemary Joyce, who is Distinguished Professor of Anthropology at the University of California, Berkeley. Rosemary will be talking about ungrading and legitimate assignments transforming learning. Thank you, Rosemary. We must move straight on to keep the time. So the next presentation is by Jerica Lauren Heinze from the Fieldwork Initiative. Her title is Trauma on Fieldwork, the FIST training. Now we have a complex situation with Jerica's presentation. Her flight was changed, so she can't be with us now, but we have a recording which was I think about 20 minutes. So we're going to play an edited version of that recording. So I want to make sure everybody understands that there is the full version of this that will be posted on YouTube and I believe on the conference website.
Yeah, so we'll press play now. Hopefully everyone can hear it, but do let us know if you can't. And then there's a point where we'll have to stop it and skip a little bit. But yes, as Matthew says, we'll put it online. Right, without further ado.
Hello, my name is Jerica Lauren Heinze. I am the founder of the Fieldwork Initiative. I'm so sorry I'm not able to be there live due to some travel delays, but technological advances being what they are, I thought I would record a quick 10-minute conversation about teaching and the futures of pedagogy in archaeology and in general across academic domains. We have many shared problems, we have also our particulars. And so I really was happy to be invited to speak here about just future directions in learning. I'm actually gonna jump right into it, and if you'd allow me, I'm gonna just share my screen. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit first about Fieldwork Initiative, which is an organization that really reimagines directions in the way that we engage with knowledge production, as well as just interventions upon learning and really pushing back and changing some of those very toxic traditions and cultures in archaeology, anthropology, as well as across the board in academia. A little bit maybe first about Fieldwork Initiative. We are an organization that is sort of a collective. We're about 3,500 members of folks with lived experience of fieldwork trauma, of allies, of just in general, folks who are out in the field and understand some of the really difficult scenarios and traumas that can occur. Well, our biggest component, which I want to really speak to you about, is our FIST training, which is the Fieldwork Initiative to Stop Sexual Trauma. This is a preventative training, and this is one of the biggest ways that we imagine really intervening and guiding healthier sort of boundary making and in general new tradition work in archaeology, as well as, again, across the board in academics. The training is essentially my 3 years, the culmination of collective knowledge of 3 years of my interviewing survivors of fieldwork trauma in various domains and asking them first, what were your experiences in the field? What were things that you wish you would have known before going into the fieldwork that would have aided you in your work and your journey and your experience? And lastly, what strategies do you use? What practices do you employ to help you feel empowered to push back against maybe some of the power dynamics that might exist in fieldwork? And just in general, what strategies? Those have been compiled into a corpus of knowledge that is often domain specific, but not always. And before students go out into the field, our goal is that every single student have access to this kind of knowledge. Does not have to be our training, but in general, what we want to see in new directions in learning and in teaching in archaeology is that there is an awareness about the very real scenarios that can occur about gender power dynamics, about racial inequity and what have you. And just the fact that trauma often happens in fieldwork. One of the main and biggest issues, and I'm going to actually transition my slides quickly. We know that the vast majority of folks who go out into the field encounter some form of gendered violence, sexual harassment, or any kind of uncomfortable situation that over time, this has been so normalized. We've really celebrated trauma in fieldwork as a form of a rite of passage. Imagine, Indiana Jones running from the boulder, this idea where we really exalt the collection of war stories. We come back and share our scars, and they're really sort of celebrated as a way of proving our worth. And we call this the rough casting principle. The rough casting principle is the idea that students come to the academy sort of like hunks of raw material, and through difficulties and through struggles and through encountering trauma in fieldwork, they sort of are carved into this final product, which is an academic. This is mirroring the historical practice of fieldwork, of how it was had, which was usually normatively done historically by children of elites, by colonial agents. We're talking here now in the 19th century with the early beginnings of fieldwork in archaeology, that it was done by, overwhelmingly white heteronormative males. And that practice became the benchmark for how we teach and how we embody fieldwork and the attitudes and practices. However, now the student looks very different than that classical archaeologist. We know probably many of you are like me from working class backgrounds, that you have already struggled a sufficient amount to maybe be just able to attend, higher learning. Or perhaps, folks have got all kinds of situations that really do not necessitate a need to prove further that they're worthy of being an archaeologist or earning their degree. But that's the tradition. And so very naturally, students and researchers have sort of digested this attitude that exists. And the vast majority feel that they do have to put themselves in uncomfortable situations in order to get the data that they need. So this is just a necessary evil. When something traumatic happens, when they encounter sexual harassment, sexual violence, what have you, the idea and the feeling is that, well, this is something I'm going to have to get used to, or just this is something I'm going to have to deal with on my own. And there's a strong feeling that pushback is going to be met with retaliation, or that the academy will not support students. And that's what we commonly see. We know that 60% experience some form of gendered violence, which is quite that's pushing it into the more severe categories. And very, very, very few people ever said anything about it, we know. Again, and this is mirroring that rough casting principle. This is something we do. Intervention, if you're ever in the field and something happens, you reach out to us, that there's going to be somebody there. I know in my own experience, when experiencing sexual violence in the field, it's like, who do I turn to? There was really not an outlet. Most folks said, well, you know, you're on the other side of the world. What do you want us to do? Go to local police if something happened. And so there's really not a space where students can reach out. And so we have a 24-hour in real time intervention aid for folks that might experience something, that there's going to be somebody there to talk to them, you know, book flights for them, imagine, you know, what kind of things they need, because it's a lot of stress and pressure to do that on your own, and they just need to feel supported. Lastly, we have a solidarity network that's just a big network, global, that we get folks connected with people they might need, things they might need, have conversations. When somebody goes somewhere for the first time, we want them to have people locally that they know that they can rely on or ask questions to. And so we have a support network. We also have a group called Women in the Field. That's an inclusive term as far as the gender. That is a Facebook group that's sort of where we're housed. And I think that probably is over on my time of 10 minutes. But I do, again, just want to thank all of you for allowing me to speak on this topic. I'll leave you just with the idea of, or just the urgency of the importance of pre-fieldwork trainings, of really having real conversations that are survivor-led to let students know what realities of fieldwork look like. This FIS training can be had, you can visit our website at fieldworkinitiative.org, or you can email us. I'll send our contacts along, or message us on Twitter, what have you. That this can be had, we do this training even for free. Nobody has turned away or refused this kind of training, because again, we do not want to wait until something traumatic happens to a student before we offer support. We want to do this from the beginning. And so the FIS training is available if it's of interest. That knowledge in general is open book. If any of you have an interest in learning what kinds of strategies exist, I'm really happy to send that information along. We have a lot of resources on our website as well. So again, I just want to thank you for this opportunity to speak about Fieldwork Initiative and the ways that we imagine new fieldwork practices and prioritizing the wellness of researchers. If there's any further questions, I encourage you to reach out to me, or just to say hi even. Again, I'll send my email along, and thank you so very much. Again, sorry I can't be there in live, travel debacles being what they are. But I'm really grateful to be able to still send this message to you. So yeah, don't be a stranger, reach out and connect, visit our website. If there's any questions at all, if you have an interest about the training, or if you want to, again, just see what is the knowledge and that corpus of information about fieldwork safety, please don't be a stranger. So.
Okay, sorry, we really chopped that up. I'm ever so sorry. We're really conscious of time. We're going to put the link to the full talk in the chat, and then you can sort of listen to it in your own time, but hopefully you got a good sense of the kind of statistics and also the kind of work that the Fieldwork Initiative does.
We wanted to also include at the end the developments about ways forward and what people can do, as well as the challenges that are being faced as our rationale for shopping.
We'll stop taking up time now.
Okay, back to Matthew.
Well, thank you, Hannah and Karina, for doing that and editing that, and thank you, Jerica, for the presentation. I believe well, I've had a look at the FIS website myself. It's an very important and valuable resource. I think we're going to be posting the link to that website in the chat in the next minute or two. Next up is Pamela Geller, who is Associate Professor of Anthropology at the University of Miami. And Pamela will be talking about On Compassion, Archaeology and Pedagogy.
All right, I just want to thank Hannah and Karina for including me in this conversation. It's been lovely. Share my screen. All right, can everybody see this? Yes, okay. So by way of overview, here I'm going to ruminate on what it would look like to cultivate compassionate action in our archaeology classrooms as a means to further a decolonial project. And my thoughts, if I can change my slides. All right. Draw primarily on the writings of Thich Nhat Hanh, Paulo Freire, and bell hooks, and I highlight some of the more salient points articulated by these scholar activists. And then I'm going to briefly review the more implicit ways compassion has entered into the classroom before turning to an example from my own experiences teaching about plastics as material culture. Essential to their decolonial projects, many writers recognize empathy as a means to ameliorate the suffering engendered by colonialism and foster solidarity within a community. But empathy on its own is insufficient for effective transformation. Without action, all we are left with is good intention. It is compassion that moves us from hopes and prayers to deeds. As the Vietnamese Buddhist monk and peace activist Thich Nhat Hanh relates, compassion is a verb with two prongs. It includes intellectual or vicarious identification with another's experiences, which is empathy, and the translation of those feelings into the alleviation of suffering through nonviolent action. Nhat Hanh writes, each person's disposition is the result of physical, emotional, and social conditions. When we understand this, we cannot hate even a person who behaves cruelly. But we can strive to help transform these conditions. Understanding gives rise to compassion and love, which in turn gives rise to correct action. Such understanding is realized through the practice of mindfulness. And mindfulness is paying attention to present moment experiences, sensations, emotions, thoughts, with openness and curiosity and a willingness to be with those experiences. And this is a definition from Diana Winston, who is the director of UCLA's Mindful Awareness Research Center. So to enact mindfulness, one simply starts with breathing in and breathing out. But beyond meditation, Nhat Hanh recognizes a broader applicability and engagement. He says that mindfulness requires us to, and this is a quote, bring all our attention to whatever we're doing, whether walking or breathing, brushing our teeth, or eating a snack. And as a teacher himself, he would likely include teaching among these actions. So in so doing, we generate awareness, connection, and forgiveness, which taken together are the basis for compassionate action. Nhat Hanh's vision of mindfulness is a type of praxis with an X, a theoretically informed political action that aligns with the pedagogy of Brazilian educator and philosopher Paulo Freire. Teaching for Freire is a political act for two reasons. One, to understand how power operates, how knowledge is created and consumed, and two, to provide students with the tools to reflect critically, interrogate common sense, envision creative alternatives, and foster civic engagement to realize a more substantive democracy. Melding the insights of Nhat Hanh and Freire, the Black feminist bell hooks extend their ideas by embracing intersectional feminism as a means for emancipatory ends. Compassion is necessary, Hook stresses, because learning about privilege, power, and injustice can often come with discomfort and pain for students. Now, none of these authors have anything to say about archaeology or its instruction. There is, however, much past precedent that has invited connection, critical thinking, and compassionate action. So discussions of NAGPRA and repatriation of human remains, for instance, certainly have engendered compassion in our students, at least in the United States. Overviews of mound builder mythology and the ancient wonder Kennewick man present a critical view of the subfield's past scientific racism and racialization of Native Americans. Instruction has also examined ongoing institutional, interpersonal, and structural racisms experienced by communities of color. When we teach these topics, students leave our archaeology class with a robust understanding of what white privilege is and how, as a consequence of their own racial categorization, they may benefit or be disadvantaged by such privilege. Beyond simply testifying to the discipline's colonial legacy and contemporary sociopolitics, such topical concerns can provide the springboard for crafting decolonial visions of archaeology. nor is a discussion of privilege limited to race and ethnicity. The pervasiveness and subtlety of male privilege is one reason I discuss gender and feminism in introductory archaeology courses. Patriarchy and sexism, as they work in archaeology, have long dictated which topics are deemed appropriate for investigation, as well as skewed the discipline's demographics. And they have furthered oppression and inequality, conditions that ultimately contribute to suffering. As a challenge, feminist archaeologists have broadened topical concerns and made transparent gender inequities and violences in present-day practices. They have also proposed creative strategies for humanizing the past, such as storytelling and digital narratives. And for their important contributions, we can thank several of this conference's participants, May Conkey and Ruth Tringham, who spoke this morning, and Rosemary Joyce, who we just heard from. And I don't know if they would see their work as compassionate action, but I would characterize it as such. So more recently, been thinking about the extension of compassion beyond the human to encompass the non-human. It is hard not to, given the dire environmental conditions we find ourselves in. And defining the Anthropocene, as well as offering insight into cultural maladaptations, are two issues to which archaeology can contribute. So my research and pedagogy more recently has branched out to interrogate the common sense of plastics, their invention, mass production, consumption, disposal, and afterlife. The interest began with my very weird obsession with dental floss picks, or to paraphrase James Dietz, a small thing forgotten. What does it mean to find dental floss picks curbside, in dorm stairwells, at the beach, in parking lots, pretty much everywhere? What is the history of their invention and innovation, their cultural significance? How did they end up in these unbounded spaces? Where will they go during the next rainstorm or king tide? Initially, these questions provided fodder for an assignment undertaken by my students in an introductory archaeology course. For this semester, I have designed a whole course titled The Archaeology of Plastics. In it, we use an archaeological methodology to explore the impact, for better or worse, that plastics have on people and the planet. The course is divided loosely into 3 parts, though certain big picture themes are threaded throughout the semester, so relate capitalism, morality, dystopia, futurity. Part 1 treats archaeological concerns such as invention, production, disposal, and analysis of artifacts. Part 2 examines the environmental effects of plastics on land, water, sky, and human health, as well as its social, economic, and political meanings. Part 3 thinks about varied public's engagement with plastics in the realms of art, pop culture, and activism. Students have to complete several praxis assignments that impel self-reflection, critical thinking, and civic engagement. For instance, they just completed a week-long audit of their daily plastic use. The short reflective analyses of their logs indicated some heightened anxiety, so my students were freaking out about how much plastic they actually use, and the reality of their consumption and disposal. But all students have noted that they are now more mindful about their interactions with plastic artifacts. They will also have to write an op-ed to be submitted to a news source of their choosing, which I actually have found pretty productive. The original title of the Times op-ed I had accepted in April was called Dear Jeff Bezos, Why You Hate the Planet. The New York Times wanted to change it. In addition to the op-ed, they're going to complete a beach cleanup with the local chapter of the nonprofit organization Surfrider. This activity is a lesson in artifact analysis, taphonomy, and non-systematic surface survey. But it also emphasizes how collective grassroots efforts can make a difference at the level of the community and policymaking. So what do I hope to achieve with this course? I want students to track the history of human technical revolutions, per Gordon Childs, from the Stone Age up to the Plastics Age. They're also learning how the discipline of archaeology can deepen understanding of plastics as material culture. And students are critically examining benefits and drawbacks, those generative and destructive aspects of synthetic polymers, as well as their cultural significance. These queries ultimately demonstrate how interiorizing individual accountability, while useful to an extent, is a political economic strategy manipulated by multinational corporations and state governments to circumvent responsibility. As for the praxis assignments, I see these as having more spiritual aims. For instance, students are coming to realize that the present moment of mindfulness espoused by Nat Han is hard to reconcile with the presentism that defines our lives during this latest phase of capitalism. A temporality in which our materiality is characterized by disposability, instantaneity, and overconsumption. The latter, as Gay Hawkins has written, is now collapsing, for in the age of the Anthropocene, plastics is making its lively and enduring presence felt. Instead, it is not Han's presentism that can help us cultivate compassion. As he writes in Love Letters to the Earth, when we come together as a group with a common purpose and commitment to mindful action, we produce an energy of collective concentration, which helps us to cultivate compassion and can lead to a collective awakening. And this collective awakening, he believes, is how we restore balance between Earth and those who inhabit it, for we are ultimately one and the same, he tells us. So whether or not the archaeology of plastics is a successful pedagogical experiment remains to be seen, as we're only a month into the semester, and compassion fatigue is a very real thing for educators right now. But at the very least, this course feels like correct action as it engages with and communicates information about archaeology's methods and theories to tackle a matter of pressing concern, one that we are increasingly realizing could generate suffering for multiple human and non-human species who are interconnected within diverse ecosystems. That is all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pamela. We'll move straight on. The next presentation is by Laura Heath Stout, who is postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Anthropology, UMass Boston. Laura will be talking about designing an inclusive introductory archaeology course.
Thank you. I am sharing my slides, and I've just put 2 files in the chat. One of them is an access copy of my slides with both the images of the slides and the text I will be speaking. And then the other is a resource guide with links to some resources I mentioned in the presentation and a few that I don't, that might help you put some of this into practice or that have helped me. So thanks so much to Hannah, Karina, and Hannah for presenting here, for the opportunity to present here. I'm joining you all from the lands of the Massachusetts and Pawtucket peoples in Arlington, Massachusetts in the United States. And today I'll be speaking about designing an inclusive introductory archaeology course. When I say that I'm an archaeologist, people often respond, I wanted to do that when I was a kid. Like marine biology and astronomy, our field is the stuff of nerdy children's dreams. Some of these kids grow up to be archaeologists, and we love to brag about how young we were when we chose this career path. But the archaeologists who caught the bug as kids are relatively homogeneous. We tend to be white and from middle and upper class backgrounds, attending well-funded schools with strong social studies curricula, and raised by parents who have the time and money to take us to sites and museums. How do I know this? Since 2016, I've conducted over 100 interviews with archaeologists about their career paths and their experiences and perceptions of systemic oppression in archaeology. My interviewees were all affiliated with US universities, and I acknowledge that my findings are specific to that context. And so, hold on 1 second. Great. I do hope that at least some part of this work can help archaeologists make our field more inclusive, no matter where you're working, even in educational systems that work differently than the context that I'm studying. So I began each interview by asking, how and when did you decide to become an archaeologist? And I heard a lot of stories of precocious kids who grew up to follow their childhood aspirations. And most of these were from class-privileged white interviewees. More of my interviewees overall, and a more diverse group of interviewees, told me that they discovered archaeology as undergraduates in general education classes. Analyzing my interviewees, I discovered that introductory archaeology courses are one of our best recruiting grounds, especially if we want the next generation of archaeologists to be more diverse than the last. So how do we make our courses more welcoming and interesting to all our students? I only have 10 minutes, but here are a few ideas to get you started. Geographic and cultural diversity in curricula. As a graduate student, I spent 3 semesters as a teaching assistant for a general education course that was meant to be a survey of global archaeology. But each semester, we began with human evolution, covered Greece and Rome, and then mostly taught about the professor's region of interest. huge regions of the world were ignored or were covered in a single lecture. And these were regions of the world that were primarily inhabited by people of color. At the 3 different US universities where I've taught, my international students have come from all over the world, and my American students have been descendants of people from across the globe. And so when I began to teach lower division classes myself, I was determined to make my curriculum reflect the diversity of my students and the diversity of the people that archaeologists study, all people. But I had never been taught the archaeology of Africa, Asia, Australia, or the Pacific in any depth. My education had focused on so-called Western civilization and on my own specialization in the archaeology of the Americas. As I planned that first course, I began to sympathize more with the professors who had stuck to what they knew. But one thing academics are good at is teaching ourselves. I spent a lot of time exploring the UNESCO World Heritage Sites website and Oxford and other handbooks of archaeology of various regions of the world. And it was a lot of hard work, but it paid off. Last year, I opened my Politics of Archaeological Heritage first-year writing seminar with a discussion of religious tensions and nationalism at the site of Ayodhya, India. After class, a South Asian American student emailed me to thank me, writing that, quote, "It is a topic that really hits home because I have lots of family in India who deal with the fallouts of these disputes every day, and it's something that is frequently talked about in my house. I have never been in a class before that has had discussions about India, whether it be about its history or its present issues." So I knew I was on the right track. So I challenge you, the next time you teach an introductory, general education, or survey course, add at least one new case study from a region of the world that is neither European nor your area of specialization. It's important to teach students about a variety of societies, but it's equally important to teach about a variety of people within the societies that you cover. One of archaeology's strengths is that we're able to tell the stories of not only the wealthy, powerful, and literate, but of all members of society, since everyone leaves behind material culture. While the palaces, temples, and tombs of the powerful may be especially photogenic, we need to show our students this other side of archaeology. Indeed, nearly all of the Black archaeologists I interviewed entered archaeology through an interest in the experiences of enslaved people. Many of my women interlocutors mentioned growing up reading historical fiction about ordinary girls in history. So we must teach the stories of past people of all statuses, professions, genders, ages, and other identities. As a teaching assistant, one of my responsibilities was helping students prepare for exams. I was surprised to find that the map sections of exams, in which students had to match a list of site names with dots on a map, were a source of great anxiety for many. Now, I knew I had enormous advantages in this area. My father is a geography professor, and I used to take map quizzes for fun as a child. But surely all of my students knew that Pompeii is in Italy, Italy is shaped like a boot, and therefore the dot on the boot is Pompeii. Easy, right? No. Pompeii is the stuff of elementary school curricula and therefore general knowledge in North America and Europe, not only because it's an amazingly preserved site, but also because our ideas about Western civilization privilege ancient Rome over other ancient societies. In the intro classes where I was a TA, the Pompeii lecture assumed background knowledge about ancient Rome, but the Terracotta Army lecture assumed no background knowledge of ancient China. The Pompeii lecture did not even include a map showing the location of the site, like the one I'm showing here. My Chinese international students had learned all of the Terracotta Army content in elementary school, but had never been taught about Pompeii until college. Then they were being tested on information that had not even been clearly presented because the lecturer assumed that they already knew basic European geography. So in order to allow students of all backgrounds to succeed, we must question our assumptions about what our students already know when they enter our classroom. We must take a few minutes at the beginning of the lecture to place our case studies in time and space and provide basic information about each of them. I add pins to a digital world map and items to a digital timeline over the course of the semester, showing students how each new site fits chronologically and spatially with what they have learned before. Sure, some students will already know some of this information, but in each lecture, it's different students who are reviewing their background knowledge. And so that levels the playing field. Students might have fun in an intro class, but how will they know that archaeology is a career path that's available to them if they do not see themselves reflected in the researchers whose work they're discussing? For many of my marginalized interviewees, having mentors and role models who share their identities was essential to their success. But archaeology professors are overwhelmingly white, straight, cisgender, non-disabled, and from class privileged backgrounds. And even those of us who are not in all those categories can only represent so many identities as individual faculty. We can mitigate our own lack of diversity as a group by highlighting the work of a diverse range of scholars in our courses. Also, Anthro Illustrated, which provides free illustrations of diverse people conducting tasks related to anthropology for non-commercial use, is also a great resource. If students see people of color, queer presenting people, people with visible disabilities, fat people, and other marginalized people in the researchers they learn about, they receive the message that archaeology is a career path that they too can pursue. For many of my interviewees, intro classes were fascinating, but field work was what really sealed the deal and made them commit to archaeology. In 2019, Elizabeth Hannigan and I analyzed a sample of 208 field schools. We found that the average tuition cost of a 4-week field school was over $4,000 US, not including airfare to the location or the wages that students would lose by not working during the summer for money. This is prohibitive for students who do not have access to wealth. As one of my interviewees put it, quote, "If I went to this info session and the professor had said, and it's a $5,000 program fee, I don't think I ever would have become an archaeologist." So if you advertise field opportunities in your classes, as many of us do, please provide information about scholarships. There's a list in the article that Elizabeth and I wrote, which is linked on the resource sheet. And also include low cost, local and/or paid opportunities among those you advertise. Intro and general education courses are one of the primary recruiting grounds for the next generation of archaeologists. If we take these and other steps to make our classrooms welcoming to students of color, students from lower class backgrounds, and other marginalized people, we can help all students succeed during their time with us, and we can make the next generation more diverse than any that came before. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, for that presentation. I'm certainly guilty myself of assuming that all the students know where Pompeii is. I was caught up in the last lecture in assuming that people knew what Druids were, which was unforgivable in retrospect. Our next paper is by Craig Chippewa, who is Veterato Curator of North American Archaeology and Associate Professor at the Royal Ontario Museum and University of Toronto. Craig will be talking about collaborative field school pedagogies and the future.
Thank you, Matthew. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk today. I'm really humbled by being part of this amazing group, and I'm pretty sure I don't belong here. But in any case, let's see what I have to say. Before I do that, I'm joining you from Toronto. So this is the land of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe nations, including the Mississauga of the First Credit River. Also, I'm going to be talking about my experience doing collaborative archaeology with Mohegan people, Brothertown people, and Pequot people. So I thank them as well. So let's just start with this title, which is way too ambiguous a title. Ambitious, I should say. It's too ambitious a title. So I'm going to talk about something a little bit smaller scale. I'm going to actually talk about teaching peer review. And it might seem like it doesn't relate to doing collaborative field school archaeology, but I think it relates very closely. When I say teaching peer review in this case, I'm talking about specifically peer review when we peer review each other's articles for journals, but I'm also talking about how we just talk about other archaeologists' work in literature reviews or how we disagree with them in print. I'm interested in teaching that because no one ever taught me that. And I think it would make a better archaeology by spending time teaching that. Now, there is two motivations behind this paper. There's my work over the last 20 years doing collaborative Indigenous archaeology with many of the First Nations and Indigenous nations I just talked about. So that's one motivation. The second motivation is a recent realization of where I had failed applying some of the ideas that I've learned doing collaborative research in other parts of my pedagogy and other parts of my, my work as an archaeologist. And so let's begin with collaborative Indigenous archaeology, which of course is a huge topic, and you have other speakers that are going to talk about it. Obviously, I can't really take the time to explain what this means. It means different things in different places. But at its core, I think many collaborative Indigenous archaeologies privilege relationships between different types of people coming together to think about the past, relationship to the past and present coming together. They privilege situated knowledge and recognizing the fallibility of different dominant forms of knowledge production. And of course, they privilege flexibility. So we can change things for the better. We can recognize the fallibility of our knowledge. And when people hear me talk about collaborative Indigenous archaeology, this is me speaking with my colleagues Jay Levy and James Quinn at Mohegan in Connecticut, USA. They often ask questions like, well, how do your perspectives differ? It's a really complicated question, but I think that's the wrong question. The question is, how do they relate? How are they similar and how are they different? Because there's a lot of shared goals that we have. And for instance, one of the things that we privilege when we teach together field archaeology and when we do research together is that the emphasis is always on our relationship and finding a way to continue that relationship into the future. It's not about who's right or who's wrong. It's about finding space for differences and understanding those differences and those different perspectives. And in fact, just doing this as part of a field school is incredibly valuable for our students, I think, from what they say, because they get to see those different perspectives. They get to see the fact that I'm a white man who's a settler colonist and how I approach certain problems and how someone like Jay, who's also in the photo here, approaches it from a completely different perspective, but also how we can agree to move on together and create a space for a future archaeology with both of those sensibilities together, if that makes sense. So that's our commitment in collaborative Indigenous archaeology in this case. But I think it's quite different from how we're taught to review each other's work as archaeologists, that is. So this came about from a recent article that I was asked to peer review, to be very clear. And it was kind of a scary experience because I was asked to review an article written by two senior scholars who were critiquing my critique of their work. And so after reading 2 pages of this essay, which was highly aggressive, I emailed the editor of the journal and said, I cannot review this. This is too personal and I don't know what I can offer you. And the editor asked me to give me my thoughts anyway, and she would share them with the authors, but wouldn't count it as an official peer review. And I was okay with that. So in this article, the tone was highly aggressive, highly confrontational, not only to me, but to several other scholars, but 40% of it was dedicated to me, I would say. And it was written as if there's this right or wrong dichotomy. And basically the position of these authors was that everyone that's ever critiqued them is wrong and they are right. And that's very different from how I would have approached that. I realize, and perhaps that's because of all that collaborative work I do. But if someone is very serious about critiquing my work in print, I take the time to say, well, wait a second, what if I could look at it from their perspective? How could I learn from that? But that's not what I was getting from this article. So I offered feedback on how they could soften their tone and how they could build upon the differences between their work and my work. Unfortunately, I don't think they did that, but that's besides the point, I think. Their focus in their critique of me was the content of the ideas that I was presenting. It was wrong. But what I was most put off by was the tone of the way that they were writing. And so that's what I talked about in my review that I sent them. But then I went and looked at the writing that they were writing about my writing. And I realized that the tone that I had when I was talking about their work was also sort of negative. So this negative tone creates more negative tone. So we need to stop this, right? And this actually was where I failed, right? Because I didn't take that collaborative spirit that I've learned for 20 years and applied it to this aspect of talking about someone else's work. So I have to do better. I have to learn from this and improve my work. And I have to teach this, take that collaborative learning and extend it to other places. And I want to teach my students about this. Now, for those of you who don't do collaborative archaeology, an excellent source that you could read about this work and these ideas is in this classical piece of research by Sean Wilson, who's Cree. He's an education scholar from Canada, but works in Australia now, I believe. This book is called Research as Ceremony. And in this, he talks about research as a relational process from an Indigenous standpoint. But I think research can be relational for all of us, of course. Now, there's many relational archaeologies and theories in archaeology today, of course, but I think this book is really important. Chapter 3 in particular deals with how we relate to each other, how we write peer review, how we write literature review. And it was really eye-opening when I first read this. And of course, it made sense to me because I was doing this collaborative work. But in any case, they taught in this book, they talk about how Western academia prizes adversarial dialogue, which I completely agree with, and competition. And this is a very text-heavy slide. I apologize. So if you want the slides, I'd be happy to send them to you. But do read this chapter. But basically, they talk about how Western academics privilege finding fault, burning everyone else down so we can build ourselves up and have winners and losers. And I think that goes against that collaborative spirit that I want to bring into my classroom. And so that's why I'm teaching a new course that I started yesterday, fingers crossed, called Writing Archaeology for my graduate students. And in this, we're spending a lot of time on peer review. We're going to read about peer review and some of the sources listed here. And again, I'm happy to share those with you. We're actually going to read actual peer reviews. Now, these are peer reviews that I've received and are anonymized, or peer reviews I've written, or peer reviews my colleagues have volunteered to me. And I think this is really useful because I never saw a peer review in my early graduate career. And I think actually some of this exercise could be pushed into an undergraduate classroom, but let's see. Because I think we just have to learn how to treat each other well. In seminars, we're going to discuss issues of tone and looking at archaeological arguments and trying to keep the disagreements, but change the tone. We're going to write our own, read about peer reviews, talk about peer reviews, talk about literature reviews, and my students will actually write peer reviews of each other's work. They'll get feedback from me on those peer reviews, and they'll get feedback from each other. Thank you so much for listening. If I went over, I'm sorry, but thank you again for including me with this great group of thinkers.
Thank you very much, Craig. I believe that was 10 minutes precisely, though I'm open to correction.
They're not just a mind who comes in. They have lives, they have experiences, they have histories, they have needs, and trying to create spaces which allow for that whole person to come into the space without necessarily crossing boundaries, which can be a fine balance, but I think is a very important part of teaching practice. I think another area that reflects care is engaging with issues or areas that the people care about in our classrooms, but also recognizing that folks outside of the discipline of archaeology really also, care deeply about certain elements of the past or certain stories of ancient peoples, and finding ways to engage people with that, I think, is really an important part of pedagogy. Also treating both the living descendants of the past who we are privileged to study, as well as those who came before, with care and respect. And this is everything from treating the ancestors with care to also recognizing the deep connections that can, and then creating learning environments for students to be challenged, but in ways that support and enable their engagement. So, we hear about ungrading, we hear about other sorts of practices which allow for students to step into a learning environment where the focus is really on the learning and less on the evaluation of that learning, and recognizing that there's different needs and different ways in which people demonstrate their learning, right? And that they've engaged with the concept and ideas that we are presenting in classrooms. So another chamber is emotion. Archaeology evokes all kinds of emotions in various people, and it can be anything from that strong sense of awe and wonder that we can feel when we visit ancient places, to the anger of a student who is not able to see themselves or has been, their perspectives have been dismissed in the classroom. And creating a space where emotion is part of archaeology is a really core component for me in my pedagogy, and recognizing that. And this involves sort of this rejection of that students should come in and basically be brains, that they should come in with their minds only, that we invite them to bring their heart, their body into that space, and that it is safe to do so, that it is a space where they can bring their whole selves again. Also, reflecting on the ways in which emotion played a role in the past. So how decisions that ancient peoples may have made may have been influenced by emotional responses, and that they're not just sort of behavioral adaptive responses, but sometimes deeply connected to emotion. And there are ways to tell that story that I think can really expand our practice. And then connecting students with the materialities of that emotion. I've been doing a lot of work recently on supporting Indigenous communities find missing children at residential schools. And when you're on the land and when you're actually engaging with these material places, it has a lot of power. And so recognizing that those connections, I think, can be a really powerful pedagogical tool. And then, of course, relation, which, of course, Craig brought up for us as well, and learning how to be a better relation. And I think archaeologists, have ways to go at times in how to do this, both with descendant communities and with each other. So that question about peer review and how we tend to treat our colleagues is a really important one. So respecting the relations that communities have with the past, building relations between the students, with students, instructors, community members, and talking through what it actually means to be a good relation. This also means really upholding clear boundaries. So recognizing that there are power dynamics, there are privileges, there are systems of power that influence people differently in that space, instructor and student, but then also there's class, there's ability, there's race, all those things play a role in how people can engage in the space. So recognizing and upholding those boundaries. And then also doing this work to decenter archaeologists as the primary stakeholders, but think about the different relations that different people may have to the various pasts that we study. And then finally, I think we do want to continue to pay attention to what this means around rigor. So my experience with this is people ask me in this emotional work I'm doing, well, how do you separate that out from the science of archaeology? And I'm like, I don't, but because I care about the work, I'm determined also to do the best possible science, to not overstate what I can do with the techniques I have, and to make sure I'm doing them at a high standard. So while we can certainly allow for these multiple ways of knowing the past, all ways of knowing have internal rigor. They have different ways of understanding what constitutes knowledge, what is valid knowledge, what is not, and we need to make space for that. And then also teaching students how to match up the methods with the things that they care about or that the communities that they want to work with or serve care about. So what are the ways in which we can best answer the questions that students or communities may have? And then, of course, continuing to maintain high standards of practice. And I actually think that it's when we engage in these things we care about, it actually expands our understanding of what is in fact possible with archaeology. So that's just the brief framework, and I know I don't have very much time left, but I will just really briefly say that for me, this very much is grounded in Indigenous archaeology. So my application of this model is very much connected to my Indigenous identity as a Métis woman and how I create these environments for my students. But I wanted to bring heart-centered practice because while it has a lot of grounding in feminist archaeology, Indigenous archaeology, queer archaeology, etc., it's this idea that it is expansive to anyone who practices archaeology, any place or any time can do heart-centered practice. And so for me, it's a specific application to the partnerships I have in different courses, how I engage with my students to challenge the fundamental sort of concepts of archaeology, to create community among my undergraduate and graduate students. But this also has application much more broadly. So I'm just going to leave you with a few questions thinking about the future of archaeology, because every practicing archaeologist comes through a post-secondary classroom of some kind. And then there are other ways in which we teach archaeology as well, but there is always a teaching of what archaeology is. And therefore we have a real responsibility to shape how people engage with the practice. And so just to leave you with a few questions. So who decides what questions are asked about the past? To whom does archaeology matter? And what can archaeology become in the future? And it all starts with teaching and learning. So hi, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Keisha. A lot to think about there. Our next paper is, our next presentation is by Anna Agby Davies, who is Associate Professor of Anthropology at UNC Chapel Hill. And I will be talking about archaeology plus teaching plus anti-racism.
Okay, so I can't see myself, so I don't know if I'm in the frame, but forgive me if I'm not. Thanks so much for the opportunity to participate in this really enriching conversation. I've learned a lot. I recognize a lot of the things that I would like to say in the work that's gone on before. I hope that you will hear the echoes, and maybe I'll be adding something new as well. Before I dive in, I want to say a little bit about where I'm coming from. So in addition to being an archaeologist and a professor in an anthropology department, I'm also the co-director of a project on our campus called Student Learning to Advance Truth and Equity. And the focus of this initiative is to infuse the topics of race, racism, and racial equity into the undergraduate curriculum across the university, rather than trying to do something like curricular reform or to add new courses. We are instead working with faculty across the university to embed these concepts and this content into existing courses so that we can reach students who may not expect to learn a little bit about the racial landscape of the United States in their course on music, for example. The other thing I want to say is because of choices that I have made in my own career, and again, because of the nature of the American Academy, I mainly teach people who will not be archaeologists. So I'm thinking about these topics as a teacher who is an archaeologist, but my students may not ever be archaeologists themselves. So that's, again, part of where I'm coming from. I'm going to touch briefly on sort of the larger scale, thinking about what anti-racist archaeological teaching means for society and for archaeology as a discipline. But I want to devote most of my time to talking about archaeology in the spaces where we're doing deliberate teaching. I'm thinking about it in terms of the classroom, but of course we teach in many different kinds of spaces. And I am thinking about this time not so much as an opportunity to convey wisdom, right? We're all working against the banking model and knowledge transfer. Rather, I'm hoping to give you some things to think about, encourage you to make some decisions, and for us to have a conversation about what our priorities are. So with that being said, there we go. So when we're thinking, I'm assuming that at some level we're interested not only in changing archaeology as a discipline, not only changing our students individually and collectively, but we're interested in changing society at large. And you know, one of the ways that we do this is in the content, right, that we present, the research that we do, that we then convey to a wider public, either a lay public or specifically to our students. But we also, I think, should reflect on the context in which we provide it. And I think we've had a lot of examples already today of ways that we can change our practice so that not only are we talking about themes that support anti-racist discourses, but also are doing it in a manner that is consistent with the ideas that we uphold. Okay. There we go. Okay. As far as thinking about what it means to educate for an anti-racist archaeology, one of the things that I think is important for us to think about is the way that we can make our processes more transparent to our students, right? Sometimes I think it's difficult for the people in our classes to understand that we don't live in our classrooms, right? That we have lives as humans, as administrators in universities, as citizens that overlap and intersect with the work that we do in the classroom. And when we draw back the veil a little bit, and I share, for example, with my students that the reason I'm ditching class today is to be at this workshop, to be at this conference, that gave me an opening to talk with them about why I think this topic is important, what I believe I'm learning from them this semester, in addition to them learning from me about anti-racist pedagogy, and also gives them perhaps assurance or comfort that these are things that I'm thinking about. I don't have to assume that they are going to know that I care about anti-racist practices or that I am supporting their activism inside and outside of the classroom. It gives me a chance to talk about it explicitly. And I think we can also create spaces to show our students where we are trying to learn, right? To let them know about workshops or seminars that we are participating in to improve our practice, and also as much as we can to invite them into those spaces to be co-learners as well. The second thing that I want to talk about having to do with anti-racism in archaeology as a discipline has to do with, and again, this may be special to the American case, but I find that there is often a resistance within the discipline of anthropology to acknowledge the possibility that we are also complicit in racist practices, that we are part of the structures that we critique and analyze. I think it is important for us to help our students understand what structural racism actually is, that we are not worried about bigotry or bad people or nasty words. We are concerned about the structures that put people into categories, separate them, value some categories over others, and move resources from one category to another systematically, generation after generation, right? Interestingly enough, as archaeologists, we have the time depth to begin to explore and investigate some of those processes, right? So, and one of the areas where we need to think about those processes is in our own classrooms. How are our classroom spaces contributing to or breaking down racism in our societies? I unfortunately started my stopwatch after I began speaking, so please give me the high sign when I need to stop talking. The points that I want to make here have to do with the fact that we are thinking about anti-racist practices as beneficial not only for our students of color, but also for our white students. Racism is a pathology that harms everyone who encounters it. It is not only a matter of ameliorating conditions for students of color, it is also about creating a healthier, more complete learning environment for students who are not people of color. Secondly, I think it's important that if we are really serious about wanting archaeology to be a more diverse discipline, and I think many of the people in this room share that goal with me, that one of the things we need to be willing to do is to really take seriously the perspectives and the experiences and the ideas of people who are not white seriously, including in our classroom. I am a person of color myself. I receive challenges from students of color in my classroom, and I know that's complicated. I can imagine that it is complicated in a different way for instructors who are not themselves people of color, but being willing to hear those voices in places where we are traditionally the person in authority takes practice. And perhaps places like this are where we can begin to exercise those muscles and develop those skills. I'm out of sync with my slides. So a piece that I've been reading and rereading and coming back to very frequently over the last, say, 2 years is written by Kyoko Kishimoto, and it is about anti-racist pedagogy as a series of domains that are distinct but interrelated, and some are perhaps more readily at hand than others. So I just want to point out that the author is drawing our attention to the need for critical self-reflection as instructors, right? That we can think about changing our course content. I will say that that tends to be my default. My instant solution is to, well, I'll just change what I'm teaching. I'll add a different lecture. I'll bring in a new reading, and that will make everything okay. But there are these other elements as well, including anti-racist approaches to teaching and also organizing for institutional change. And this quotation from the article really brings it all home for me. So the author writes, anti-racist pedagogy is not a prescribed method that can simply be applied to our teaching, nor does it end with incorporating racial content into our courses. It is an intentional and strategic organizing effort in which we incorporate anti-racist approaches into our teaching, as well as apply anti-racist values into our various spheres of influence. And I'm quite concerned that I'm approaching the end of my time. I'm looking at Karina and Hannah. Can you give me a number?
Your time, if you could just sum up now, Anna.
Okay, so I will just say, please, please, please read this article. Talk about it with your colleagues. One of the things that I found most important, and I'm just going to come to this slide here, is in the commentary on anti-racist approaches to teaching. I feel like this is where archaeology can shine. So even if we aren't thinking about making archaeology anti-racist through educating a new generation of students, the work that we do in our classrooms to leverage the skills and habits of mind that we have as archaeologists will improve our classrooms and improve society through the growth of our students. I apologize for going over. I'm very excited about this, and we'll stop here.
Thank you, Anna, very much. We very share your excitement. The next presentation is by Kelly Pollard from Charles Darwin University, and Kelly will be talking about what can Indigenous teaching pedagogy look like.
So thank you so much for the introduction, Matthew, and I'm very happy to be here.
Have we lost Georgia and Melissa entirely now?
Sorry, it's a bit early over here as well. It's only 3:15 in the morning. I'm not sure if we've lost Georgia completely or not though, but I can try and share the screen. Can you all see that?
We can.
Yep.
We can.
Awesome. All right. Just going to have to bear with me. She's meant to do the start. I'm meant to do the finish. Are you there, Georgia?
I don't think she's.
Sorry, everyone. Now I've just got to work out how I can see the notes at the same time. And we're meant to be right up there with technology these days, aren't we? Sorry about this, everyone.
You could just show it like that, Mel, maybe.
You sure?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, go for it like that.
Go for it.
Hang on, just give me a second, sorry. Can I just... I'm just going to sort it out off the screen and then I'll reshare.
Can I talk about Kelly's stuff while you're doing that then?
Please do, Claire. Thank you. I love how us Aussies are sticking together.
Matthew, is that okay? I'll just... just for a minute? So what Kelly's doing is she's really turning around archaeology. So she's actually working with Aboriginal people to find out what archaeology would look like done by Aboriginal people. So what's the theory and method of archaeology that's done from an Aboriginal mindset? So she's doing something entirely different to decolonising it. She's kind of recolonising it, or she's actually inverting it all. And so she's thinking deeply about the philosophy of it and so on, and a very quite radical ways that will be very radical. And she's so I'm very happy to be associated with all of these. Mel, I know all these people. They all been in my home. Even Matthew Johnson's been in my home. You know, Karina, Hannah, you should come here to Australia. You can come to my home.
We'd love to. Yeah, we were just talking about how we can plot to get out there.
If only the country would let people in and let people out.
Okay, if I have a proposal to make, which is that if Georgia and Melissa are having technical difficulties and need 5 to 10 minutes to sort those difficulties out, my suggestion would be that we have 5 or 10 minutes of questions now about indeed any of the presentations that we've had, and then we will return to you, Georgia and Melissa, in 5-10 minutes. Is that agreeable to everybody?
Sounds like a great idea.
Yeah. Okay.
Great. It's great for me. Thank you.
Okay. So I've been sent some questions. I'm just reading through. First of all, a question for Rosemary Joyce. It's actually from Karina. Karina totally agrees that grades get in the way of learning, but how do you go about appeasing the university who are so grades driven?
So at the end of the semester, there has to be a letter grade unless the student at Berkeley has opted for pass, no pass. When students actually ask me their advice about this, we talk about their goals. And if their goal is to get into a conventional graduate program, obviously letter grades are important to them. What actually happens, and I show the students this grade distribution, is that most students in my classes get an A. I don't use the minuses. And a few students do not do well. So I have a highly skewed bimodal distribution. The only place in the university that becomes transparent and visible is in the reward structure for excellence in teaching. When I am approached about that possibility, I always say, that's wonderful, but don't waste your time, because one of the things the university judges you on is your grade distribution. And my grade distribution, if I teach well and the students are engaged, 100% of them should fulfill the contract, and at the end of the semester we'll have an A. I'm not in the business of norming them. I tell the students that at the beginning of the semester. I show them the grade distribution from the previous semester. We go over the fact that this is part of a movement to remove grading as a incentive. And then at the end of the semester, if they have done their work, from the university's perspective, from my perspective, they've earned the A. If you just think of the A as completion, it makes it a little more transparent. And again, this is something that I primarily run into problems with in helping to mentor graduate student instructors. I am one of the people who rotates in teaching our core pedagogy seminar, which is required of all new graduate student instructors, and just getting our own heads away from the idea that this is a qualitative judgment of who is outstanding. Once you get done with that, it goes away.
Thanks, Rosemary. I would add something to that, which is something that I've encountered. Somebody's moved from the UK to the United States. That professors here, particularly in private institutions as opposed to public institutions, have much more latitude out of the grades they give, and also what are known in the UK as marking criteria, and in the USA, sorry, North America, I do apologise, in North America are known as rubrics. These are still very much a work in progress. I'd say the majority of professors here do not have rubrics, and explicit marking criteria are still more or less controversial. So I'm just hearing that Georgia is back. I think we can proceed with the presentation by Georgia and Melissa. So I will hand over to them.
I'm so sorry. Let's try this again, shall we? Okay, this is looking much more promising. All right, so good morning, everybody. Mel and I are coming to you today from Australia. Obviously, I'm on Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country, and Mel is coming to you from Yawuru country near Broome in Western Australia. We would like to acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples from across Australia, their elders past, present, and also those yet to come. So today we would like to Australian Archaeological Skills Passport in the context of providing a tangible way that we can contribute to the training of future generations of culturally competent archaeologists. In the almost 2 years since the launch of the Australian Archaeology Skills Passport, we have seen great upheaval within the archaeology sector here in Australia. Now, given this context, it is perhaps surprising, or at least it is for us, that the Passport project has gone from strength to strength. We have now distributed over 2,000 physical copies of the Passport around the country. The early success of the Passport highlights both the ongoing need for this type of resource here in Australia, and also how successfully it's been integrated into the broader national archaeology learning ecosystem that connects teaching, learning, and practice. So the intersection between teaching, learning, and professionalism within the discipline of archaeology has long been of importance to Australian archaeologists. The second conference of the Australian Archaeological Association, our AAA, in 1979 was in fact themed around archaeology, education and training in prehistory and archaeology, as it was then known. Over the next 40 years, several key issues within the Australian archaeological teaching and learning space have been identified, including the gathering of reliable data on teaching, learning and training for benchmarking, the addressing a series of skills deficits, greater cooperation between universities, government and industry for teaching and learning, coordination of vocational experience for students and new graduates, and the promotion of archaeology to the public. The Australian National Committee for Archaeology, Teaching and Learning, ANCTAL, has been working over the last 2 decades to develop a strong learning and teaching ecosystem within Australia, which seeks to actively address these concerns, including undertaking longitudinal profiling the profession surveys, developing national archaeology benchmarks, and now the Australian Archaeology Skills Passport. So launched at the 2019 AAA conference, the Passport is designed to support archaeological training. We have designed the Passport specifically to provide greater transparency on the requirements of entry into the workforce here in Australia, providing not only a clear route for students to follow, but also providing employers with a much more accurate expectation of graduate capabilities. A Passport also provides guidance on what professional development opportunities should be targeted to fill those persistent knowledge gaps within the discipline, identified through our longitudinal surveys. The Passport project also provides greater transparency on what Australian archaeology is all about, specifically targeted at the promotion of archaeological stories to publics who own and relate to that archaeology. So the Australian Skills Passport is available in both hard copy and open access digital formats, making it accessible to anyone who would like to use it in any kind of context. So feedback from teaching staff, students, traditional custodians and early career archaeologists has been overwhelmingly positive. From a teaching perspective, the Passport presents clear pedagogical benefits, fostering an environment in which students take a more active role in their education and skills acquisition, promoting networking skills, independence and self-motivation. Students too are reporting benefits. Critical skills which are required within the archaeological workforce are now clearly identified, and many have commented that they feel a lot more secure in knowing what to expect when they enter the workforce. We've also had several large and recurring orders from Aboriginal representative organisations who have reported similar positive experiences in recording the already significant skill sets of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander sites officers and rangers. So I'll just pass over to Mel, if Mel's there.
I am, hello. So a key objective of the Passport is to support the connection between graduating students and industry. The concept of job readiness is a challenging phrase that has been increasingly used here in Australia with the introduction of the federal government's Job Ready Graduates package, which actively sidelines humanities courses, including archaeology and anthropology. So the Passport seeks to strip away the uncertainty of what is required to be job ready, attributing a level of certainty to the varying skills and specialisations available within archaeology, in addition to the level of skills experience required to perform independently. The offering and uptake of professional development opportunities identified as critical through the profiling in the profession surveys has likewise been facilitated. Another key outcome of the Skills Passport is to provide a formal way for our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues to record their knowledge and capabilities, encouraging the equal weighting of experience gained through life and through study. We also envisage the Passport of becoming a basis for alternative entry methods into the discipline, supporting applications for entry into programs such as the Certificate for in Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Management offered there in Victoria, and providing a record of skills experience when applying for heritage jobs. To date, we have seen the Passport used widely within collaborative research projects, cultural heritage management work, and independently within Indigenous heritage range teams. As we move past COVID restrictions and back into the field, it is anticipated that there will be further opportunities for the broadening use of the Passport by Aboriginal site officers and rangers through mechanisms such as these. And interestingly, I've just been doing that the last couple of days up here in the Kimberley. The final intended outcome of the Skills Passport is for increased public outreach. So as the Passport and supporting documents and audiovisual resources will be available in open access format, they can be easily incorporated into primary, secondary and tertiary settings, particularly linked with national curricula focused on Australian archaeology, First Australians and contemporary Aboriginal culture. This year, we are working towards the release of a series of lesson plans to sit alongside short videos, which will describe a range of archaeological themes linked to the national curriculum. Through these components, we aim to begin to foster a greater understanding and appreciation of the longevity and complexity of Australian culture in its many forms within the broader community. So building on this work, we released a second edition of the Passport early in 2021, connecting with Indigenous archaeologists, including Kelly, who we've just heard from. We have formulated improvements to 3 of the skills within the Passport, including the requirement that all sign-offs for the cultural competency modules are done so exclusively by either Indigenous people or Indigenous organisations. For those working within Australian Indigenous archaeology, There's also an expectation that a minimum of 50% of both the collaboration and stakeholder engagement modules will also be signed off by either Indigenous people or Indigenous organisations. This not only emphasises to students and early career archaeologists using the passport the critical importance of these skills within Australian archaeology, but also that these skills can only be acquired through active implementation of collaborative archaeological practice, learning from our Indigenous colleagues. In implementing strategies such as these international programs like the Skills Passport, we aim to foster change within the discipline through teaching, learning, training and practice, actively reshaping the future of archaeology in Australia. Importantly, we would like to thank all of our colleagues who've collaborated on the development of the Australian Archaeological Skills Passport since 2018, and also thank Karina and Hannah for the invitation to be part of this interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melissa and Georgia, and a particular thank you for recovering so quickly and adeptly from the technical difficulties. And lastly, thank you for staying up until 4 in the morning to be with us today. Okay, we're running a little bit late, but we have a little bit of time for questions and discussions. So we'll try and take a couple of questions if we can. Penny has a question for Craig, which I will read out, and then if it's after I've read this question out, I'll take, if people want to put their hands up, I will take any questions that come up. Penny asks, Craig, could you say a bit more about how you actually do the peer review? Several of the students, Penny says she does, I do it as well in my dissertation workshops, get the students to do peer review, and I have to say they're absolutely brutal about it, far more brutal than I would expect them to be. So would you like to talk to that a little bit, Craig?
Sure, but just to point out that, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. This is my first time teaching it, and so I don't know, I'm experimenting, but what we're doing is every student, we have basically the second half of the course. It's a 12-week course. So for about 6 weeks, we have a writing group. And so at the end of every seminar, we have our writing group where we sit and we talk about our different projects that we're working on. And as part of that, every other week, they do a peer review of someone else's work in the writing group. And the peer review that they write goes to me and to the student, and I give them feedback on the tone of the quality of the peer review, and the student gives them feedback as well on what they thought was very valuable or maybe less valuable. And then they actually reflect upon that critically throughout the semester, and they have a journal that they keep. So that's what I'm trying to do, but if you have any other questions, let me know.
Can I ask if anybody else has any other questions? I'm looking for hands in the chat. I can't see any. I'm also very happy to take questions. I'm sorry, I'm looking for hands on the speaker faces.
Laura Hoostout's got her hand up.
Go ahead, Laura.
I just, even though that question was directed at Craig, I wanted to throw in something about teaching peer review that I found useful. I've taught a bunch of freshman writing courses to pay my rent. And one of the things I found that's worked really well for teaching peer review tone is that I give students the worst paper I wrote as a freshman in college. And I say, 18-year-old Laura isn't here. You cannot hurt her feelings no matter what you say about this paper. So let's tear it apart. Let's say everything that's wrong with it. And then let's imagine that 18-year-old Laura is here and she's going to cry if you're too mean. And how can we say these things to her in a way that respects that she did try here? And the students find that they really do tear it apart. And then we find ways to state the same thing constructively, and then I have them look at each other's things and I say, think to yourself the really harsh thing, and then look at your partner and remember that they're a human being with feelings, and then say it in a constructive way. And that's worked really well. Now that's freshmen and first year undergrads, so maybe it would be a little different on grad students, but I encourage people to try something like that.
Thank you, Laura. Kisha and Neil both have their hands up. I don't know which of you put your hand up first. Why don't we take Kisha and then Neil? Kisha, unmute yourself.
I was just clapping for Laura.
I confused the clap with a hand up. I do apologize. Neil, you've got your hand up. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I have a question for Laura. Now, you may have covered this because I've mostly been listening whilst trying to run around and look after my little boy because his mum is away working. But you were talking earlier about, for instance, like the sort of different pathways that people from different socioeconomic and also ethnic backgrounds have made their way into archaeology. And that's the thing I've become really interested in a UK context. So I just wondered, data-wise, where that's come from. Now, lots of that is obviously from interviews with students and things, but I wonder, essentially, because I'm interested in trying to draw on, there isn't really data for stuff like this in the UK, and I wonder if there are sources that I could draw upon elsewhere. So is all that information just from interviews about how people have found a way in, or where they've started and how that's come about, or is there information out there about that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so my qualitative interviews, there's some about this in my dissertation, which I will find the link to it online and throw it in the chat in a moment. I'm also working on a book. So Pamela, who also presented today, is my editor. I'm working, Pamela. I'm writing. So there's a chapter on recruitment in that you know, is in draft form, but yeah, it's hard to find things. A lot of the surveys that have been done of archaeologists, like there are surveys about the demographics of archaeologists, but they haven't, I haven't seen a lot that ask about, like, well, how did you first get interested? How did you get into this? And so you can look at things like the demographics of who's publishing articles. You can look at some professional organizations, including the Society for American Archaeology, have like needs assessment surveys that they do every 5 years that have some about demographics of the membership. It is really hard to, it's hard to get at. Yeah, it's really tricky, but yeah, a lot of what happened with me was I decided, you know, how did you decide to become an archaeologist would be a nice opening question for my interviews, just as like, in part just because people, you get asked that all the time. And so it's an easy question. For most people have an answer prepared. And so I thought, well, this will be good for establishing a rapport. And I wasn't even really thinking about the like research value of it. And then I was just noticing how I was, as a class privileged white person myself, I was bonding with other class privileged white people about like, oh yeah, and then I went to this museum, or I went on this like trip to Pompeii when I was 8, or like, and then the people who didn't have those stories were saying, well, I got into it kind of late. I didn't discover archaeology till I was 19 years old. I thought, well, like, wait a minute, that's not old. Just because some of us were 8 doesn't mean that, you know, that but this sort of self-consciousness among some of my interviewees about not discovering archaeology until college really caught my attention. And then when I sort of counted up, I just categorized them all as like before college or after starting undergraduate. And I was like, oh no, they're in the majority, actually, the people who discovered it in college. Now this is US focused, and you don't have to choose your specialization before applying to college here, so I know it might vary some, but
okay,
yeah, so that's what I got for you.
Thank you very much, Laura. I really wish we could continue with this discussion, but I think we must draw it to a close now. We've got a mere 18 minutes until the next session on teaching assistants and archaeology and heritage, and I'm sure everybody wants to have a stretch and a break before that. So in a moment I'll thank the speakers, but can I again thank Hannah and Karina for organising this. Can I thank particularly a number of the speakers for being up at such an unsocial hour, but more broadly, can I thank all the speakers to this afternoon. I'm calling it this afternoon, it's the afternoon here, this afternoon, evening, early morning, for putting on such a great degree of presentations. So please, if you can, unmute yourselves and either use the icon or clap in person. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think we ought to say, in terms of the teaching assistant session, that's going to take a much more relaxed roundtable feeling. It's really for people who are early career. So please stick around if that sort of describes you and you're interested. But we appreciate that most people are probably going to head off. So we thought we'd just share our thank you slide once again.
Yeah. Or can I just add, though, that you don't need to be a GTA to stay. We also value the perspectives of people that have been there and want to pass on their experiences and knowledge.
But and yeah,
anyway,
but just to thank everyone again, Hannah for helping us organise it. Our session chairs have been brilliant today. We've packed this programme with amazing paper. People have given just such fantastic papers. Thank you so much for speaking, and thank you so much to the fantastic session chairs for marshalling everything. And I'm sorry we haven't had more time for discussion. We probably tells us we need to do this over several days in the future. And thank you very much to those who've been live tweeting, and thank you so much to everyone who has inspired us. We put our link for feedback in the chat, and we would really welcome that so that we can help develop these in the future and do more in the future and stuff. So thank you.
And just thank you.